Prudence is the virtue that disposes practical reason to discern our true good in every circumstance, and to choose the right means of achieving it. I chose this virtue because A. I did not know what it meant beforehand, and B. My grandma immediately came to mind when I found out what it did mean. I chose my grandma for this project because, among other things, she has always had a positive outlook on life and a genuine concern for the futures of those she loves. How has your mother, Grandma Irene, influenced the concept of what it means to be prudent in your life?
I think of the people you mentioned, Grandma Irene probably had the most influence as far as prudence is concerned. Mm-hmm. She was a person who was totally forward thinking and what would take to accomplish something in a kind of ordinary, everyday sort of way. She was so organized that she started doing Christmas in August, and she was always frustrated with the Haney family because we were not that organized about Christmas. Mm-hmm. And so I told her one time that we were sent on earth to try her patience, which she had a lot of, but mm-hmm. Anyway. But no, she was a very bright woman, and she looked at the picture, the big picture, and she made it happen. And I'm not just talking about Christmas, but in her everyday life. She was the person who took care of the farm in terms of the financial part, the planning for when they were raising animals, to have food for the animals when they had to have someone come to take care of something that she herself physically couldn't do. She was the forward thinker because my father was on the road as a speaker, and so she had the sole control of the farm, and that was their income. And so she was very organized. She could have run a company, really, mm-hmm. And but in a very nice sort of way. She was a great influence. Not only that, but she was a person that had standards in terms of how she didn't gossip about people. Mm-hmm. She didn't, to my knowledge, never held grudges, for example. And she didn't make it hard for people to interact with other members of the family. Point in question is because I came from a broken home, so to speak. Christmas was always difficult because we had my dad, and then we had my mother, and then we had Bruce's parents and so forth. Mm-hmm. And she always made it very easy for us to come to their place without saying, oh, well, you went to such and such last year or whatever. And she never made it hard, where other members of the family made it hard. So it taught me a lot about how to conduct my life, I think. And I admired her for that very much.
When raising your children, how did your concern for them influence your anxiety over future events and overall develop the virtue of prudence in your life?
I read that question and I've been thinking about it, and I don't know just how to approach it, except I think I learned along with the kids. Mm-hmm. When you're first married and have children, everything is brand new. You learn as you go. Being a parent is a brand new experience, obviously, and even though you may look at other people and say, well, I would like to be that kind of parent or not that kind of parent, but what your emotional response or how you handle things, you kind of learn, and you have to be a forward thinker when you have children, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise they'd go hungry and not have anything to wear. But, and as the children got older, when I didn't have exclusive, what do I want to say, control of their schedule, when they started going to school, for example, and then when they branched out and wanted to have friends over to play, and maybe there were children that you felt were a bad influence. Those were all questions that you had to think about. You didn't want to take away their freedom of choice or make your child feel like they were being punished or something like that. So it was, you had to think about the person and the ramifications and how you're going to handle it. And so it really puts you in a position of thinking about all that and how you're going to handle it. The first time it happened was the experience for other things that came down the road, so to speak. But I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
I think you are, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. But I kind of learned as I went along, honestly.
Yeah.
And I did think about those things in passing, because it's that kind of thing is in the news.
Yeah.
Even in the old days, as your parents would say. But because you know that other people influence you, and you know that your kids would be under the same influence.
Yeah.
And you don't want to... I don't want to label another child. I don't have that right to label somebody.
Yeah.
But if you see something in that person that you think is not a good influence, it's a kind of a conundrum.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is not labeling that person like, oh, you don't want to be associated with that person, but to maybe give an alternative, maybe an activity or whatever it happens to be. But you have to think about it, because it's you don't want your child labeled.
Yeah,
you don't want to label another child. You
Yeah.
know, that kind of thing.
That's true. What are some things in the next couple of days you may do that could be seen as prudent, either to accomplish a short-term goal or a long-term goal?
Well, I'm going to go out of town, and that's a pretty simple thing. So I've already started thinking of what is it I need to have ready, or what do I need to do this week so I can go out of town. And if something would occur that I wasn't coming back when I thought I would be, I need to look at what needs to be done or have finished or available if someone has to pick that chore up or whatever it might happen to be. Kind of everyday living sort of things, really.
Yeah.
And there's things like bills to pay and things of that nature, and running errands, and everyday life situations.
Yeah.
It helps to have food in the house too.
Yeah.
So anyway.
What are some times it has been difficult to be prudent in your life? What times have been easy?
And, you know, when I think of prudence, apparently, I think of the more everyday challenges that you have, not necessarily as a what do I want to say, a virtue, but maybe that is a virtue too. I don't know. This is, I think, the point where I mentioned to you earlier that when you said prudence, I thought, I maybe have to look that up. Yeah. But the times I think that would be prudent, that became difficult, would be times when there were maybe crises in the family, whether it be, I suppose, job-related. I'm just theorizing now. Yeah. Job-related or illness, and you know, those kinds of things that you can't prepare for ahead of time necessarily. Yeah. So how do you take care of it when it happens? Right. And And I know that there were times of when there was severe crises in the market, for example, or not in the market, but in the the market was down, and there were a lot of people who left the business.
Yeah.
And that was in the 70s, which, you don't need, that's ancient history to you. And so you had to think about, okay, things are not as fluent right now, or affluent, and so you had to look at how you're spending your money more wisely and that kind of thing. So, and obviously we made it through, so that was good.
You read a lot of books. Do you think that any books you have read have shaped the idea of what it means to be prudent to you?
That's a difficult question.
Yeah.
Some books that I've read certainly have influenced me. I think some of the books that I've read recently that have been a great influence to me have been by an author, William Kent Kruger. He writes a series, but he also has some standalones. And one that he wrote, and I don't know how, probably it's been a few years ago, but I didn't read it immediately. Now again, I should have looked up the author or the title, but it's about 4 young children that are living in a forced environment. They're indigenous people, and they are in a boarding school. The difference is they can't go home. They are not allowed to keep their religion. They are not allowed to see their parents, and they are virtually captive, and they had people who were cruel to them. Now, this is a novel, but we now know that is absolutely what has happened to the indigenous people. And they had a belief in a higher power, and a lot of these schools were faith-based, and that makes it, I guess, appalling, because what's happened to Christianity in all of that, and respect for a human being. So I think, to me, that has influenced me as far as, and I don't know how this affects Prudence per se, but to have respect for other people who are not the same color skin or may have not the same background that I have. And we all are, as in a book that Larry Dwyer wrote about, now I'm having a senior moment. Oh goodness, I can have the book right over here. But the chief that had his trial here,
Standing Bear?
Standing Bear, thank you. Standing Bear. He was the first, what you might say, the voice for equality, because they were forcing him off his land. They meaning the Great White Father in D.C. And at his trial, he reaches out his hand and says the question, "Is not my blood the same color as yours?" And that is such an amazing lesson. And for a man that other people considered a savage, and of those two groups, who is the person who is not a savage? And so I think those things have had great influence on me. Maybe that could equate to, what I just told you, how I want to treat other people. Maybe that's where prudence comes in, thinking about my attitude and those people as as human beings.
Yeah.
Not a indigenous person, and not a Jewish person, or not a Palestinian person, or a Muslim, or any of those kinds of things, but as a human being.
Yeah, and that's kind of prudent too, just kind of think of the bigger picture.
Yeah. So it influenced my behavior in that respect.
How do you think you have exacted prudence differently from when you were a teenager versus now?
Oh, when I was a teenager, I didn't think about anybody else but myself, you know. Well, I know I don't think that's quite true, because I've always been very fond of my mom and my grandmother and that kind of thing, and I was, you know, would not want to do anything would alienate myself from them or my parents in general, but my life surrounded with my friends and what we wanted to do, and I was an okay student. I got good grades, or okay grades, I guess, but it was more putting in the time and wanting to graduate and to get on with my life, so to speak. And then when I started college, I thought, oh, that was a rude awakening. They wanted you to study. Wasn't that a good idea? So anyway, and interestingly enough, how your attitudes change. I mean, I of course, you know, did well finally when I settled down in college, but later on in life, I wanted to go back and renew my teaching certificate, and so I had to take some graduate courses. And my attitude was, if I don't get an A, I'm going to die. So, I mean, figuratively speaking. But anyway. So maturity does change your attitude and your forward thinking and preparing for what you want. So it's... And, definitely different. And you enjoy it. Yeah. That's the thing, too. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the classes. It was challenging. And I like that. Intellectually, it was challenging. Yeah. So, yeah, it was actually quite fun. Because I was challenging myself. Yeah. Anyway.
I learned that having concern for others can help you be more prudent, and that you should hold on to every moment you have, especially those with your grandparents.